the dilemma for atheists. Atheists can say they don't believe in God and demand proof. But that's the least of their problem, because so long as they continue to reject any possibility of God's existence, they can just continue to say the existence of God hasn't been proven. But this isn't, as I said, not a problem so far as their life or sense of reality is concerned. The big problem for atheists is that once they've rejected God and what they call the supernatural, meaning not what they believe in, is that they're left with a material or physical conception of reality. But where is this? It's comforting, perhaps reassuring to look around, kick a few stones and thump a few tables, and well, even breathe in a few gasps of fresh air and think, wow, this is so real. I'm just surrounded by reality. And the interesting thing is that despite how easy it is to find reality, you can't really find it. You can't actually pin it down. You can observe it, but the observation can never be really firmly made, because the harder you look at reality and the more you think about the reality, the harder it is to grasp and see. On our level of existence, our frame of reference, reality looks real. There's nothing more real than reality. But look at it harder. Get a microscope, get an electron microscope, get a particle collider, and reality starts to look very, 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 very different to what we see it. And we start realizing this reality is very amorphous, very flimsy, very, dare we say, spiritual, because it's all about mass and motion, energy, and there's nothing really substantial to grasp a hold of. So when we say reality is physical, what actually do we mean? Because its physicality isn't anything that we can really observe, as it were. And in fact, and in the observation, even the very observation, the very act of trying to observe reality, we change the reality. The reality that we look at, that we are trying to observe, is changed because we are trying to observe it. So again, what actually is this reality that we're trying to observe? And regardless what we might think it is, the point is, this reality isn't the reality that an atheist can really grasp, but it's the reality, it's the only reality they have. So what does this tell us about the atheist conception of reality? It suggests it's based on a really very flimsy foundation. It's based on a foundation that they can't see, they can't grasp, and they can't even prove it exists. Because in the very proving, they're altering its foundation. And there is actually a very good reason why this is so. And why it is so is partly, or in one context, or one presentation of it, is because they have grasped a hold of something that's not there. And The general atheist reaction to saying reality is not real is to assume that reality must be, or is being said to be, a product of the mind. But we know this isn't true for the simple fact that while what we see can be changed through the observation, we can't actually control how it changes. The change is irrespective of what we would like it to be. We can't look at reality and say, well, we want this lead to turn into gold, for example. So we're left with the question that if reality isn't a product of the mind, how is the mind a product of reality? If the one doesn't hold water, if the one doesn't compute, why does the other? How is the mind, which is not physical, created by matter? How is our will, which confounds and competes with matter, energy, space, and time, as it were? How is that the product of matter, energy, space, and time? If we can make choices, how are choices the result of causative forces? There's a disconnect here, and we can brush it aside, but we can't explain it, and we certainly can't make it into a coherent framework of understanding. Well, it's the spiritual, which is mind and understanding and love and relationships and all those things that are most intimately human. They're not physical, and you can't derive them from the physical. It's two different realities, the physical and the mental, or the physical and the spiritual, and this includes the mental. But if we're saying the physical is not real, how is the physical spiritual? How can we conceive of reality as being spiritual when we can see and feel and touch it? Is there no objective reality? And if there's no objective reality, then why isn't it just simply a product of the mind? But even if this was so, or if we wanted to take this approach, how is the mind a product of the mind? There's a contradiction here, an inconsistency in our thinking. And there's no resolution to this other than by going to God and resorting to the God hypothesis. If we don't accept the God hypothesis, that's an explanatory conception or explanatory hypothesis, we're never going to resolve this dilemma. And it is resolved because God speaks the world into existence. God creates the concepts out of which the world is composed, and which we receive as a communication and understand the symbology, and can reconfigure this symbology, these concepts, into our own language, into our own way of thinking. And this is partly science and partly just common sense, because the creation of God is open to all sentient beings. The truth is written in our hearts, in other words. The glory of God is written in the creation. So we can understand creation just as an observation of the universe. But to understand how it's formed, how it is constructed, we have to see it as being a product of a mind, but not our mind, God's mind. What we see as real is a conception of God, because what he creates, he conceives. As we conceive, when we think of a story, we're conceiving of a reality in our mind. We can create a science fiction story, and this is a reality in our mind. And if we had a being that we could create in the way that God created, that being would see our conception of reality as reality. The character in the story sees the elements of the story as real and reacts to the elements of the story as if they were real, because we've created it all. And this might not be on the same level as what God's creation is, but it's still conceptually the same. It's still the same basic situation. But until we can accept that God exists, this solution isn't open to us, and the atheist is going to be forever stuck in his mind-body dilemma that Descartes articulated and couldn't resolve, and is never resolved, because ever since at least Descartes, we've always assumed that reality is objective and has to be explained in objective terms, but it's not. The objectivity is simply a conception of God.